This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, good afternoon, or good morning. For the request of the Ohio Manufactured Home Association, we put together this little slideshow for basically for manufactured home installations, and it's just general information. As you can see, it's just an overview of some of the information that pertaining to the manufacturer's installation instructions and some of the issues that you might come across, might run into. One of the things we need to address from the get-go is we probably need to talk about some terminology. First of all, some basic stuff. HUD, which is nothing more than Department of Housing. It's been in existence since 1976. There's basically four parts that affect our industry and our installations and our manufacturing build process. The 3280 right here is what the factories have to deal with as far as the details and the construction requirements and what they have to have in-house as far as paperwork. The last part, 3282, is the part that talks about the procedures and enforcement regulations. The middle two here are 3285 and 3286. That's the part that the code and the regulations that deal with installations. Sometimes you'll hear these codes referred to as the standards or the code or the law or the regulations. Depends on kind of who you're talking with and who you're talking to. You'll hear the term DAPIA from time to time in the installation manual. That's something that's required. The DAPIA is a design agency, design approval primary inspection agency, DAPIA for short. They're the people or the third parties that HUD approves, that the manufacturer's contract, that review all the submitted floor plans, design documents, and of course, the installation instructions. We're going to use Adventure Homes Manual as an example. And one of the things we just hit on is they have over 800 documents in their DAPIA manual for their design package, what they do in the plant. And of course, out in the field, they have 100 pages or more in the installation manual. And of course, then they have addendums on top of that, things that aren't specifically addressed in their installation manual. You may or may not have a copy of this. If not, we can get you one. Other manufacturers, depending on their product line, of course, and what it is they build, may have a lot more details, a lot more technical advice and installation instructions. IPIAs are the Production Inspection Primary Inspection Agency. These are the guys, the third-party people, who are required by HUD, monitored by HUD, and again, they are contracted by the manufacturer. They work in the plants, they inspect every home and somewhere on the assembly line. Next is IBTS, which is the Institute for Building Technology and Safety. And this is basically who HUD has contracted as an oversight agency, and they review what it is that the IPIA and DAPIAs do. In the process, by going into the manufacturer's facilities and looking at finished units, they look at product within the plant, they'll look at the systems that are being used in the plant, they'll look and see what the third-party inspectors, the IPIAs, what they're looking at and what they're inspecting to. They do the same thing with the DAPIA, but the DAPIA, of course, being that's the review agency, they'll look at approved documents, they'll go to their office, and they'll check to make sure what they're approving, and in this case, installation manuals, if it is up to the code. SAAs are state administrative agencies. The state can handle this and usually does, but in some instances they choose for economic reasons to allow HUD to take that enforcement policy over. And HUD will utilize these state agencies to monitor what happens in their respective state. Of course, they'll not only look at manufacturers' facilities, but they'll look at installation that's being done out in the field. When they choose not to act, when the state chooses not to act as the SAA, that falls back on HUD to perform the duties of the SAA. When that happens, HUD doesn't send anybody necessarily from Washington out, but they also hire contract labor that will go out and inspect site installations. Now, they won't do an inspection that is necessarily and recognized by the local. They'll do it after in addition to what the local jurisdictions already. They won't do every house. They'll do random checks. This is where one of the first questions asked by these third-party people is, they'll ask you as an installer, one of the first things we've run across is that they'll ask you, do you have an installation manual? And if so, they might want you to produce it or show it to you on your laptop or your iPhone. They just basically want to know that you've got the specific manufacturer for installation manual for whatever house you're setting for installing. Once you know how to use the manual, that's the biggest thing you got going for you. If you have a manual and you can use it and you understand it, your job becomes a lot easier. Your questions that you receive from the local jurisdiction or from the HUD's policing agencies that do the SAA and a lot simpler, easier, and you won't have to do any rework for non-conformances. One of the things to remember is that even though it sounds like they're getting more involved recently and it's something new, and some people refer to it that these are new inspections, they're not really new. They've been around for several years. The requirements have been, but what we were once doing that was acceptable, not necessarily does that make it right or does it necessarily make it wrong. HUD has just become more involved in checking site installations, even though the code has been, like I said, in place for a significant amount of time. If the work you're doing, if you can't show where it comes out of the installation manual, then there's going to be a lot of questions, many questions about the road. Local inspectors, they definitely shouldn't know or will know as much about the different manuals as well as you should. And of course, it goes without saying, you'll gain a little bit of respect if you can to them up front, show them in the manual. And then if you have them in repeat instances, if you're in the same county jurisdiction, locale, your work will go a lot smoother. One of the things I would stress is that even though we're going to go through the manual here in just a minute, it would behoove you and benefit you to make sure you read an entire manual, installation manual, especially if you're setting for the same manufacturer on a regular basis, whether it be Adventure or one of the competitors that they use, whether it be a Champion or a Clayton or whatever. Manual all the way to knowing how they put their manual together and what is in it is important. We're going to move on to the Adventure installation manual, but we're going to use an example, and most of the examples here came from that manual. they're not necessarily the same as other manufacturers, but the one thing HUD has done is they have put out a blank installation manual or a generic one, and most manufacturers have incorporated that into their own package, so they're very similar in their layouts, which should make it easier if you're doing multiple manufacturer home sets. The first all the manuals have in common is they all have a table of contents of some sort. We're going to go through a little bit. You'll see here's a table of contents, and most of them are set up this way. There's an introduction section, a getting started, prepare the site, install the footings, constructing foundation, set completely multi-sections. And you'll just see so on and so forth. Here's roofs, crossovers, interiors, how to stabilize it, which is talking about the tie downs. Excuse me. To footers, utility connections, what to do with appliances and equipment, exterior work, and then basically preparing the home for occupancy, and of course completing a checklist. Of course, everybody's checklist, each manufacturer will have a little bit different depending on their design. Introduction section, Advantage manual, like most, they've got a page to tells you how to use the manual, and you'll see that there's a single wide section, a multi-section. They break it into 4 parts: pier and ground anchor sets, load bearing walls, interior foundations. And you have numerous places where tell you where to get started and different things like table of contents that we were showing you, the footings, excuse me, setting the home, connecting the utilities. You can look here on the left side, for example, here's a single wide section, pier and ground. It says getting started is on page 9. And if you just read this here, you could probably get about 85% of what you need to know. But again, that's when I said earlier, you still need to read the whole manual, because every now and then there's bits and pieces on different pages that will refer back to these pages, or these pages will refer you to those pages. Something to keep in mind. Don't just go by this list. Read the whole manual whenever possible. Of course, the next couple pages in the most installation manuals, in this example, it's pages 3 through 8. They just cover the regulatory issues, some of the definitions. Again, I would encourage you, don't overlook the definition, because every manufacturer might term things just a little bit different. Make sure you look at that closely. After you move on into the page 9, which is getting started in this example, the page tells you what you basically need to know for a successful installation. It also tells you that you're going to need things in addition to the installation manual, such as the floor plan, what the roof loads and wind loads are. A lot of times the roof loads and wind loads can be found on the data plate. That's a requirement by HUD. And in the Adventure's case, they put their data plate underneath the kitchen sink. Some will put it on the breaker box, some will put it in a closet. One thing I added here is, even though installation manuals have a lot of information, they're not always specific, and sometimes they're general in nature. And they're general for a couple of reasons. Manufacturers don't just sell homes to the locale that you live in, or the state you live in, or you're working in. They make it so that their manuals, they put them together good for wherever they might ship homes. It might be all the way through the Midwest, since that's where Ohio is at. It might be for Pennsylvania, Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Illinois, so on and so forth. in preparing the site section, we're going to skip over that a little bit because we're really dealing with installations, and preparing the site in this presentation is probably before you get there. Footings. Footings is something that you need to be aware of, even if some of you may be putting the footings in, some of you may be setting the home on existing footings or footings that are already there. And of course, there's always blocking points. And Adventure, in their case, excuse me, they use paint, and they mark the underside of the home on where the blocking points are. Some bags, some will use fair prints, some will use different colored paint, some will use stencils. Footing material. A lot of times the question comes is, can I use poured concrete? Can I use ABS plastic, pressure treated plywood? Some of these things depend on the geographical location, whether you be it. Sometimes in Ohio you can't use all these things, but you can maybe. Yes. You'll notice up here in this section under poured concrete, sometimes the question comes up, do I have to use pads? Can I use slabs? Can I use, or all that's addressed right here. Pads, slabs, ribbons. It just tells you what the cement has to be, the concrete has to be. Cast in place concrete footing may also require some additional reinforcement. All this here is has to be determined based upon your geographical area. Talk about ABS pads, which has become a question here lately about where are they acceptable and where aren't they. You'll see here under ABS plastic that you can use them on stable soils. Even though you can use them on stable soils, you still have to use them in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions, pad manufacturer's instructions, not the home manufacturer's instructions. And of course, ABS pads aren't necessarily suitable for all areas. Footer size. Sometimes the question comes up. Everybody's manual seems to show square footers. You see the 16 by 16, 20 by 20, 24 by 24. And they say, well, nowadays it's more cost effective to use an auger and punch holes in the ground and use round footers. Adventure's manual also allows you to use round footers. You just have to make sure you have the same total square inches, which is either equal to or greater than the square one. And then right here's Adventures on this page. In this table, it shows you where the conversion is. Right in here, it talks about how to convert it. And right down here, it shows you what the equivalent of the round is for the square. Typical permanent foundations are available, of course, for load-bearing walls. Ones that want to put it on a crawl space. Some people will ask, well, who provides that design? That design is the responsibility of the builder or the retailer. And most locales will require it to be approved by an engineer and architect. When you get ready to set the home after the site's been cleared, graded, and prepared, there are different methods to do that. Roller sets are the most common manufactured homes. Crane sets are something that most installation manuals say are allowed, but you really have to have the knowledge and you have to be comfortable with how the homes are built and if the home is even designed to be set by crane. In most cases, it takes a little bit more than what manufacturers provide. Talking about pier material, one of the things that we see and we hear from local jurisdictions and from set crews and contractors that go out is not using the right material for the piers. So when you get ready to set your piers, you've got concrete blocks, you've got caps, you've got spacers, you've got shims, and of course there's commercial stuff you can buy too. One of the things that we know we've seen and we've heard about is shims. People not getting the right shims. Adventures requires a 4-inch wide shim by 6 inches in length by 1 inch maximum and made of hardwood. And they also require 2 shims at every location. You can see right here they're pushed. One goes in from one side, one goes in from the other. And as long as that's less than an inch, that's acceptable, an inch or less. Here's a typical assembly. You got stacked block, you got a solid cap, you got some kind of spacer material. If you look up here, your spacer material, it's normally a nominal 2-inch thick board. Again, it should be something that's treated, pressure treated. And you've got caps, and again, caps either like your 4 by 8 by 16 precast. They can use that for caps. You can use 2 by 8s that are pressure treated. You can see there's a few different things to use. Pier construction can be, when it's typically done with blocks, there's a restriction on how tall you can go with just a single stack of blocks. When you have to do a single stack, you can go up to 36 inches in height. A double stack, you can go 36 to 67 inches in height. And if you have to go higher than that because you're on some unlevel ground, rolling ground next to a pond, water, stream, creek, then you've got to get a registered engineer involved to tell you how to put the pier construction together. Here's an example of a single stack, less than 36, double stacked, interlocked together. You'll see you've got your caps in here, your spacers in here, and in this case, because you got 2 by 6s or 2 by 12s in here, you've got your shims. And again, there'd be one shim going this way, and then one shim coming back the other way. And there's 2 of them there, the same width. Over here, it's just 2 shims. Over here, it's 4 shims. Moving on to multi-section or double wides. Adventures manual will address basically a 2-box method or a double. That is typical for 2 sections in this review. And some of them have hinged roofs, some of them have fixed roofs. And of course, there's always a little bit different in the way they're tied together, fastened together. And it's because each manufacturer uses different engineers, and the engineers are kind of like doctors. You can go to a doctor for some symptoms, and if you go to 2 different doctors, you're probably going to get 2 different treatments. Same thing holds true with engineers. If you go and lay a design in front of them, one may tell you that you have to use bolts, and another one tell you you can use nails. Talking about a hinged roof, typical hinged roofs, and this is an example of an adventure. That most hinged roofs are basically designed and built in the same manner. You've always got a fixed king post at the high end or at the marriage line side, and then you've got a swinging arm or a support. And so you raise the roof, You swing that arm out and it sits on top of the king post. And then this right here is where I'm talking about different engineers come up with different connection requirements. It's not only the engineer, but sometimes it's the truss manufacturer that dictates how this all has to go together for the different wind loads and roof loads. It's not something that you have to know who the truss is, or you have to know who the engineer was. If the information should be in the installation manual. In this case, it shows that indentures, they send on for each sectional or 2 box, they would send some 3/8 inch OSB, 15 3/4 to 16 inches in height, 8 foot long, and at each end of the house, from the gable end back into the attic space, they want that OSB on there, and that's their engineer designed that for some of the wind load protection, and that's on each side, and it would be right here, placed right here on the arms that swing down, the support arms. This is the fastening schedule for that. I'm gonna go. This is the gable ends. When closing up the gable ends, this happens to show there's a hinge there, but it's true whether it's a 312 fixed roof or a hinge roof. And the Denture uses 512s and 712. They use something for material here for backers to go up and down on the truss, because the truss doesn't have vertical uprights. They've got diagonals. You can see that diagonal on the cutaway, but they'll send you the OSB already cut to the angles, pre-cut to the angles that fit on that after you put in your 1x3s or your backers. When you go to start fastening the 2 boxes together, there's a couple different ways you can do it. In the floor, you can do it from underneath by toenailing. This is the trim board at the marriage line, at the mate line. You can do it from above. Typically, this is not used much because of the finished either carpet laying here or lino laying here. This is from underneath, where you go up through the bottom board, or you can even go inside the floor cavity and you go straight across. You do want to stagger them so that you get the house drawn together. Here's a case where how you fasten the top of the roof together. A lot of people toenail down through before they put their ridge cap on. Some will go in the attic and they'll actually lag through from beam to beam. Some on the 312s show a strap that goes across the peak. And I'm kind of cut off there by my table, but there's a strap, and like Adventure on their 312s, they'll put a strap on 1/2, and then they'll fold it down. So when you get ready to set it, you have to fold it up out of the way, put the 2 boxes together, and then push the strap over, staple the strap down. That's what those lines are. Fasteners, staples, or nails. And then you put your ridge cap over the top of that. You got to connect the walls. Here shows the inside, how around doorways and large openings, you screw the walls together. And there's the screw and the spacing. Here's an end wall where the gable ends of the house where you fasten them together. There's always some kind of diagram in everybody's installation manual like this. This is marriage wall connections, how to fasten at large openings. This would be your support columns that go from your beam down through your marriage line, down through your floor, down to your footer and piers that are required underneath your large openings. Of course, then you've got to, when that's all said and done, you've got the boxes tied together. You want to put vinyl siding and the shingles on. We're going to kind of skim over that. You have to do crossover connections. HVAC on sectional homes for, of course, the electrical, the plumbing, and sometimes even gas. So in some states, in some areas, you've got to have licensed electricians, plumbers, or HVAC guys to do this. It depends on your area, what's required. Most manufacturers will ask you to get licensed electricians and plumbers and HVAC guys. A couple examples of typical crossovers. You got a trunk on a main trunk on this side and a main trunk on this side, and there's just some people refer to this as an elephant trunk with a flex line goes from side to side. You just don't want that laying on the ground though. You want to strap it up, keep it up off the ground so it doesn't draw moisture. Every now and then you'll see a furnace that doesn't sit over the heat duct. You'll see the furnace over the heat duct. Here you see it's out in the middle, so you'll have like a Y boot where you have to go to that heat duct, from this furnace to that heat duct. Not going to address triple wide. Not well versed in it. Adventure doesn't do triple wides. Electrical connections, same thing. You got to make connection between the two boxes, the two halves, the two sections. Some will be in junction boxes, some of your connections because of your larger wires, your range, your dryers, your furnaces. Others there'll be junction boxes in the floor with access panels. Some will have the quick connects that are underneath in the floor or at the end of the house with access panels. A lot of times these are marked or identified 1, 2, 3, 4 or A, B, C, D, or they might say GFI, or they might say smoke detector. So you get the one from one half connected to the right wire on the other half. Of course, one of the big things with manufactured homes is because this is a 4-wire system, you want to make sure you bond or ground the chassis to each other. And there's usually a copper wire on the back end next to the outriggers. It's coiled up on one side, and you take it and put it in the lug on the other side. Water line connections are similar to the electrical. They'll be in the floor. There'll be access panels where they cross together. You got a female fitting on one side and a male on the other. Most people are using PEX anymore, PEX water lines. Drain lines are a little bit more work to them in some cases. In sectionals, if you've got drops on a bathroom or a kitchen on different boxes, you'll have a drop coming through the floor on one half, a drop coming through the floor on the other half, and they have to be tied together. Manufacturers are required to supply the material and the adhesives and the strapping to hook all that together. There are also drawings of how that goes, shipped with every home, inside each home. You just want to make sure that what you put up, you strap it so that it doesn't sag every 4 foot, and that you want to slope from your house drop down to your tie into your sewer or your sewage line. Gas line connections, sometimes they're done with a quick disconnect. Sometimes they're done with just a shut off and a flex line. When it comes to preparing appliances, one of the things you want to do is you want to make sure that you unpack the appliances, whether it be a stove, refrigerator. When I say unpack, a lot of times the packing from the manufacturer of that equipment, they'll have the cardboard protection, the plastic to prevent it from getting scratched. You want to make sure all that gets removed. You want to make sure that the appliances are set up for whatever gas is going to be used, whether it be natural gas or LP gas. You want smoke detectors. Smoke detectors have battery backups, which are required. You have to pull the little tab out so the batteries become engaged. You want to make sure that any appliances that have vent pipes that go through the roof, that they've been extended through the roof, or shipping caps that we put on. Fireplace is a good example. A lot of times, most manufacturers with the 16 wides, they'll take the light fixtures off and ship them loose at the exterior doors, so you'll have to put those on. You want to kind of complete your work, do it once over. You want to make sure you repair any holes in the floor, bottom board when you were hooking up the crossovers. So if you install the skirting when you're done, you want to make sure when you do that, you check that the ground moisture vapor barrier is put in place, and that it's not been pushed out of the way when you've been underneath the house crawling around. You want to make sure when you put that skirting on that if there's a dryer, that you've extended that dryer vent to the outside of the skirting and that it's not underneath the house. That'll just create problems later on with moisture. Kind of brief overview, but I think that gives you a little bit of idea. Maybe it's a refresher for some of you. Maybe it's totally new for others. Just want to thank you for your time, and I hope that in some way this kind of benefits you in your future installations. Last thing I'll remind you of before we go is reiterate it again. If you got the installation manual and you're setting for the same manufacturer on a regular basis, make sure you read the installation manual from front to back. You'll be surprised if you read it a couple times what you might find in there that can make your life easier and more cost effective. Have a good day. Hello, good afternoon, or good morning. For the request of the Ohio Manufacturing